Hi there, grade 5s. Welcome back to WorksheetCloud.com and to your natural science lesson for today. A reminder of our email address, that is grade5@worksheetcloud.com, should you have any questions about any of your subjects, or if you'd like to share with your subject teachers some of the work you've been doing, we'd love to see it. Now, today in your natural science lesson, we are going to start looking at life cycles. Today, specifically the life cycle of a flowering plant. But before we do that, I thought it would be really good to recap some of your learning from grade 4. It must feel like grade 4 was a lifetime ago for you now. But in grade 4, you learnt what a plant needs in order to survive. A plant needs air, light, water, nutrients from the soil, and warmth, all in order to grow and to survive. But I wonder if you can remember from all the way back then in grade 4 why a plant needs those specific things in order to survive. Well, let's have a little look. So, a plant needs warmth. If it is not warm enough, it will not germinate. And if you cannot remember what the word germinate means, don't worry, we'll be going through it a little bit later. But for the time being, take a note of it inside your brain, and you may want to add it to that scientific dictionary that we are building. If a plant does not have enough light, it will grow to be tall and flimsy because it will be searching for the sunlight. It will probably die because plants, remember, need light to photosynthesize. And you will remember from our lessons yesterday and the day before that, that the plants are considered in food chains producers because they make their food from sunlight through photosynthesis. If a plant is not watered enough, its stem will become fragile and it will have very dry leaves and it will eventually die. So what parts of the plant do the specific jobs? Well, the leaves is where most of the photosynthesis happens. In fact, any part of the plant that is green generally photosynthesizes, but of course the leaves are the ones that collect the most sunlight. They produce food for the plant using light, water, carbon dioxide, and they throw out as a waste product oxygen, which is very good for us because that's what we as humans need in order to survive. The stem's very important because it transports water and nutrients to the plant from the plant's roots. And the roots take up water and nutrients from the soil. They also keep the plant anchored to the ground. If there's a strong gust of wind or something that washes over the plant, the root holds it in place, just like an anchor would on a boat. Now, I've left out one important label, and that is for the flower. So, well done if you remembered all that information from grade 4. And now we're going to add to it as we learn about the life cycle of a plant. Now, on your screens in front of you, I have both our vocabulary for today and our learning objective. We are going to learn the 5 stages of a life cycle of a plant, and here are the words you need to note. Germination, roots, leaves, flowering, and seed dispersal. They all make up the 5 stages of a plant's life cycle. So just so that we've got a little bit better understanding of why each of those stages are so important, germination. Germination is when a seed starts to grow in the right conditions. Roots, remember, go underground and are very important to anchor the plant and give it those much needed nutrients and water. Leaves, if without the leaves, the plant cannot produce its own food. Flowers are needed in order to make new seeds, and those are then spread out so that they can grow without fighting for space with their mum or their dad, or the parent part of the plant. Now, I don't know, maybe you have helped your parents out in the garden quite a bit, Or you may not have a garden at all, but maybe 1 or 2 indoor house plants. But all plants that flower generally operate in the same way. So let's have a little look at the process in more detail. The first step in the life cycle of a plant is the seed, and the seed needs to be planted into soil. The seed can be planted in a pot inside or outside, or it can go directly into the ground. Now, it's during lockdown at the moment, so I can't tell you to rush out to the garden centre and buy some seeds. However, I bet you have got seeds around the house with you without even really realising it that you could grow over the next couple of weeks. Maybe your mum's got some tomatoes in her fridge, and if you pop out some of the seeds and let them dry on a piece of tissue paper, you could plant those in your garden and grow a tomato plant. Maybe you've got some sunflower seeds or some beans in your cupboard, not the ones that in a tin that are in brine, but raw ones. Those you could also plant and see if you can grow a plant of your own. So the first step is the seed, planting it in the soil. Remember, it must have water, sunlight, and soil in order to germinate. The water gives it, it needs water, the sunlight for the warmth, and the soil for the nutrients. So those 3 things will allow a plant to germinate. Once it's planted and it's watered, it could take up to about 2 weeks before it starts to grow. This is called germination. Once the seed germinates, it will start to sprout. A little root will appear, and the root will help the plant get food and water from the soil. You may have done a bean experiment in class, when you were in grade 4, where you watched, because some plants you can actually plant on layers of wet tissue paper to see the beans start to germinate. In the next few weeks, that seed will begin to push up through the soil into what we call a seedling, the beginnings of the plant. It is still very tiny during this stage, and the roots will anchor it in the soil to stop it from blowing away. But it has a lot of growing still to do. As it continues to grow, it will start getting taller. The stem becomes longer and longer for a few reasons. Obviously, it needs to support the plant, but also it might be on the ground and covered by other plants, and it needs to search for that sunlight. And remember, the stem is also very important because it brings up that much needed water and the needed nutrients up from the soil, from the roots into the plant to feed it. At the same time, the leaves start to develop and begin to unfold. They actually, if you've ever seen a seedling, the leaves actually started almost folded in, and then they start to unravel. And that's important because now the plant needs to make its own food, and it does that through the leaves using photosynthesis. Now, after a few more weeks, and in some plants even longer, a bud will begin to appear in the plant, and that will eventually turn into a flower. Depending on the type of plant, the flower may even turn into a vegetable if you're lucky. In the case of those tomatoes that I've said to you to go and plant, they'll start to flower, and then they'll turn into tiny little green balls, then they might go orange or yellow, and then eventually into the red tomatoes that you love to eat. Excuse me. But the flower, remember, is super important because without that, we cannot have a new generation of the plant. In plants that don't produce fruit or vegetables, the seeds are actually located in the flower. Once the plant has finished growing and a process of pollination occurs, which you'll learn about next year in grade 6, the seeds will drop to the ground. Some seeds are spread by the wind. Think of those dandelions I used to love to pick and blow as a kid, and then my mummy would shout at me because I'd be spreading what she used to call a weed across our garden. Or some of you may have seen those seeds that the helicopters, they fall from the trees and they fall down like that. Those are spread by wind. Other seeds can be dispersed by animals. My dog always comes back from when we've walked him with those prickly seeds that have got stuck to his fur, and they drop off as he's been walking. They stick on him as he walks past the plant and they drop off elsewhere. And that's really important because a seed that is spread away from its parent plant means that it does not need to fight with its parent plant for the soil and the light and the water that they all need in order to grow. And then the life cycle repeats itself. So if I take us back to our original slide here, and now you know that is how the life cycle goes. Germination, seed starts to grow under the right conditions of being warm, watered, and having enough soil. The roots then will develop in order to anchor the plant and give it that first initial boost of water and nutrients. The leaves and stem bring the plant above ground. Now we've got a seedling, and those leaves unfold in order for the plant to soak up sunlight and create energy for itself through photosynthesis. Then we get a flower, and that is super important in order for pollination and for seeds to be produced. And sometimes those flowers can turn into fruit and vegetables, and other times they don't. But either way, they get dispersed, and then they grow a new plants. And then the little cycle goes around and round and round all over again. In fact, you'll learn a lot about many different cycles in natural sciences as you grow up. Sean, last year you maybe learned about the water cycle. Now this year we're learning about life cycles. And as you grow up and you go into high school, you'll learn about many more cycles that exist in the natural world. So here's some pondering questions to end with today. Let's see if you can recap some of your knowledge from grade 4 and the things that I've taught you about the life cycle of a plant from today's lesson. Number 1, what do you think would happen if a plant did not have sunlight? Why does a plant need roots? What do the leaves of a plant do? And number 4, if you could plant something during lockdown, what kind of seeds would you plant? Okay, so now while you're pondering those questions, let me just remind you of seed dispersal being the fact that seeds can be dispersed by either animals or by the wind, those types of things. But also remember that animals and people can disperse seeds also in another way. Something like squirrels, for example, eating acorns and burying them, they often forget where they've buried them, and from that acorn can grow a new one, like a new oak tree. Or even the birds eating the berries on the bushes, they eat and digest those seeds and then poop them out elsewhere. Now you have a seed that has landed on the ground. Not only is it landed on the ground far away from its parent plant, but it's also got its own little nice packet of fertilizer in the form of the animal's poo. So seeds and plants are incredibly clever. Right, let's see if you did manage to answer these questions. Number 1, what do you think would happen if a plant did not have sunlight? Well, we went through that at the very beginning of this session. We said the plant would grow very tall and spindly as it searches for sunlight. It would also become incredibly flimsy, and without sunlight, the plant would start to die because it needs it for photosynthesis. So if you've got any of those points, well done. Why does a plant need roots? Well, incredibly, it needs them for 2 reasons. Not just, as I'm sure you all said, to get water and nutrients from the soil, but don't forget that they also need roots to anchor them, to hold them in place should there be heavy wind, heavy rain, or anything to try and wash the plant away. What do the leaves of a plant do? Well, they have the most incredibly important job of producing energy for the plant through photosynthesis. Okay, so keep that in mind. That is why, remember, they're called a producer. And then number 4, if you could plant something during lockdown, what kind of seeds could you plant? Well, I did say this earlier. You can plant anything that you've got hovering around your house. You could plant the tomato seeds. Let them dry out first. or some beans if you've got raw beans, not the ones, don't go and try plant baked beans or anything like that. Or maybe even you've got an avo pip. Have a little look, Google it, and then you may be able to find out how to make those seeds germinate. So thank you so much for joining me today, grade 5. Make sure now, I've put for you an activity on the website, WorksheetCloud.com. Underneath this lesson, you'll see it. There's both an activity on the life cycle of plants and the memo so you can mark it. But if it were me and I were you stuck at home, I would also do that scientific dictionary, add these words, and draw out your very own life cycle of a plant with the 5 stages for your records. Tomorrow, we're going to look at some life cycles of animals. Have a lovely afternoon, and I will see you then. Bye-bye.